Robinson, or the Playtyper guy, as my son calls me. Joining me today is Laura Bogart, uh, author of the book Don't You Know I Love You? And her work has appeared in Lit Hub, The Atlantic, The Guardian, and Salon, among other places. You can follow her at LD Bogart at all the places, even the place formerly known as Twitter. You'd written a really amazing piece for Dame Magazine about the Barbie movie, your personal connection both with Barbie, the idea, the toys, and this film specifically. So I think the best way to start is just let us kind of, if you can tell us some of your thoughts about the film and what your piece itself and what that journey was like.
Well, thank you for having me, Stephen. I really appreciate it. And I'm very happy to come on and talk about Barbie. I got to see it at a big pink party the Thursday before it was out wide on July 21st. And, the first thing that I noticed about it was just the warmth and the vibe and the good energy of everyone wearing pink. And it was this sort of communal experience among women, queer people. And I think that is very much reflected in the fact that the movie is doing so well. It had a monumental opening. It's having another blockbuster weekend, because I think that there really is a hunger for this type of storytelling, which is very accessible, which I love about the movie. The messages are very accessible. They're easy for anyone and everyone to understand. But there's a real warmth and depth and intimacy and vulnerability there. I saw someone on TikTok describe the experience of watching a Greta Gerwig movie as being like Greta Gerwig kind of takes your heart out of your chest and dusts it off for you and gives it back to you. And that is very much what this movie does, I think. And I know that obviously there's been sort of a backlash to it on sort of all ends of the political spectrum. Obviously, Ben Shapiro is off burning Barbie dolls and having a fit. He's just Ben. Nothing to do with that. And that is to be expected, because even sort of the most basic mention of women having interiority and, a big piece of blockbuster filmmaking not being oriented around the male experiences is just too much for their brains to handle. And then there is also sort of a backlash among people, I think, who want the movie to do all things for all people and who want it to reflect sort of the totality of women's experiences, and they sort of critique it as being like a 101. And I never found that to be a problem, because again, it is a mass marketed piece of blockbuster entertainment. I think having these messages in a very broad and, like I said, accessible way is not a bad thing, because clearly when we look at the state of the world, these messages are needed. And the movie sort of came to me at a time of personal transition in my own life. And that's what I wrote about for Dame Magazine, where I recently, at the age of 41, had sort of an epiphany of my own life. And I realized, after signs that were both subtle and not so subtle to me and to the people around me, that I am actually like a gay woman. And that was, it was monumental. It's very transformative. And so I was really looking into things like compulsory heterosexuality and, exploring pieces of queer community. And when the Barbie movie was being released, even down to like the marketing and the trailers and everything, there was a big kind of excitement about the movie. And I think it was sort of encapsulated in one moment in the trailer that like kind of helped it go viral, and was also like very like a big kind of crowd pleasing humor moment in the film. And that's when, Ryan Gosling's Ken like comes forward and he's like, "Hey, I was thinking I was gonna, stay over tonight." And she looks at him like very earnestly and is like, "Well, to do what?" And he's like, "I'm actually not sure." And so the idea that like Gerwig was going to play with this idea, well, it's Barbie and Ken, right? Like heteronormativity is baked into, or so I thought, baked into the Barbie allure, right? She's the stereotypically beautiful, like femme presenting woman who has the hunky boyfriend and the great job and everything. And it felt very inaccessible to me, even as a younger woman. And so, I mean, I was going into it because I was excited about Greta Gerwig, and I have always loved Margot Robbie's work. I've always found her to be really interesting. I, Tanya is a masterful performance. She does a lot of good stuff. And so when I went in to see the movie, what I really saw in this, and I'm certainly not alone in this, is that Barbie's journey throughout the movie, and I don't know how spoilery it's okay for me to get here, but
Everyone in the world has seen this film.
fair.
We hope. Please go for it. Yeah.
Barbie's journey is like really one of like moving into authenticity, even if it's painful, even if it's hard. And it does not end with her getting with Ken. It does not end with her in any type of romantic attachment or even interested in having one. And in the essay, I talk very much about this idea that, like, I mean, look, Barbie, there's queer coding in the movie that is very overt, like Kate McKinnon's character. That's very clear. There's a lot of she's like in the splits, which is like clearly kind of a reference to things that people do with their Barbies, right? And there's a big swath of people, non-binary folks and trans folks, who like really responded to Alan, Michael Cera's character Alan. Also, a lot of gay men responded very much to Alan. But I was really surprised at how much of Barbie's sort of journey out of like, I have this life. It feels very routine. It works for me until it sort of doesn't. And I'm aware of something that I can't put back in the box. And they literally try to put her back in the box in the movie, and she resists it. And in her instance, it was sort of these thoughts of dying, of mortality, of the world beyond the world that she's living in. And for me, it was sort of this awareness that like everything I had been told about the things that I should want in life did not align with where my actual desires were. I was not interested in dating boys in the same way that friends of mine were. I did not experience desire for men in that same way. I admired men as people, but I never had that sort of added extra layer to it. And I, for a time wondered if I might be asexual. And it is also worth noting, there's a really good piece by a writer named Scarlett Harris who talks about Barbie, having a place, this depiction of Barbie really being important to the aromantic asexual community. But as time went on, my awareness became, oh no, actually you do have desire. It's just, it is for other women. And so I was not expecting to see like a genuinely subversive kind of move away from patriarchal structures that does not involve going back to any sort of conventional blonde perfection, male, female, a cake topper sort of thing. And I found the movie really resonant as I think about my own sort of movement away from compulsory heterosexuality into this life that I have now. And so I think that it is those sort of like intimate emotional undercurrents of the movie, which also touches on motherhood, womanhood, sort of the impossible contradictions of it. And I think that's why a lot of people are taking things from it, but definitely folks in the queer community.
And what you were saying earlier about Barbie's journey, I mean, one of the critics at New Rock Stars, the channel, likes to say that every movie is either Citizen Kane or The Wizard of Oz, and Barbie is sort of, in certain ways, both. Like
Yeah.
Ken's journey has that sense of, I need to be loved to have value, and everyone needs to love me, and realizing not to do that. Well, Barbie goes in the world, and of course, it works. I mean, all of these things are just, if you're someone who grows up loving movies and loving stories, how well Greta Gerwig tells this story, the little things. Even again, put in the box, here's a joke, but actually that is a choice that this character is making at a specific point that leads her down. Like you're watching this and, oh wow, this is great. And how the idea that every good story, the person wants something that's a lie. So
Yes.
then they realize, no, no, the lie I want, because if it's just I want to grab the MacGuffin and that's it, then there's no growth. If his idea is like, I get this and I'll be happy, but I realize that's actually not what's going to make me happy, there's a chance of growth. And so Barbie's leaving to get back to her status quo, and she
Mhm.
realizes that's actually not what I want. And so, but the idea, what's amused me when people like Shapiro and others, experts on Barbie, because
Oh,
that's the whole
absolutely.
thing. It's like, look, these guys, I think someone had joked of like, well, when they make a Barbie movie, at least I won't have to hear from 40 something white men about how their childhoods have been taken away, like with with Ghostbusters and with um Star Wars. And suddenly it's like,
Mhm.
oh my God, this is Barbie. Like, really? Where you play, like, is there some sort of what do you think has been taken from you? But
Mhm.
the idea that essentially, I think what they're reacting to is Barbie is this sort of sense of traditionalism in the world, and
Mhm.
how dare, frankly, people like us, specifically people like you,
Yeah.
go after that traditionalism, and that's what they're offended by. Yet, this is a film about Barbie. So, like
Mhm.
even when it's opening, the sort of the history that I didn't obviously know
Wow.
about
I
until
didn't either.
it hit me. Oh, of course, like yeah, like playing with Barbie dolls is modeling motherhood, and shifting to Barbie is sort of imagining you're
Mhm.
cool. It's like when shows like, first that girl to Friends, the idea of like being in your 20s and young and doing stuff like and that was Barbie's world. She wasn't a mother. She had a car, she had her own money, she had her own stuff. And you can talk critiques about consumerism and capitalism,
Of
but just
course.
within our world, that was cool. That was what young girls were modeling after, and which the whole examination of Ken, and there's some people from both sides.
Yes.
Feminists are like, well, why is Ken in there? Why do you have to have villain? He's still in the show from Barbie, which I don't think. I think Margot
Mhm.
Robbie is brilliant in it, but also
Mhm.
I was kind of like, well, not to mansplain, but Heath Ledger kind of like he like villains, a bad guy, or my love
Yep.
of every Disney movie.
Mm.
That's what makes a great hero, is their struggle. If it's just someone kind of like, if there is no obstacle and the
Wow.
personification of those obstacles is kind of boring.
Yeah.
And but also it's not out of any, Ken is the ultimate accessory, right? Like Barbie
Yes.
and Ken,
Yes.
we're telling girl like, okay, well, you need to buy this because, okay, well, you're gonna have to have a boyfriend. They're not married. This is in the 60s. So at the time, the implication, of course, going back to that scene you mentioned, about him wanting to go to spend the night with her, the implication, they're not married, they're not having sex,
Mhm.
because this is the 50s or 60s. So Ken is many ways the ultimate, to use a terrible
Go for it.
MRA term, a cuck. He's like, and all the jokes about Ken not having
Mhm.
private parts or whatever leads to that, because the implication is he's with Barbie but not really with Barbie, right?
Mhm.
And so I found like Greta Gerwig is very deliberately exploring all that, and it's so cool. Of like, yeah, what is the purpose of Ken? Because girls never really, why, if you're like the target age of a girl first starting to play with that, even beyond your sexuality, were you really that interested in Ken
No.
unless you were being told to, right?
Yep.
And so Barbie is kind of like, Barbie world is truly the world of like girls wanting to play and enjoy themselves and do stuff. And growing up in media where I was told that it's only men who have friends, and the women are just the friends of, or the spouses of the men, and they become friends, but they're not their own thing. But here's the community of women who are friends and supportive of each other, and it's really cool. And it's the men who fit for someone who loves watching soap operas and Melrose Place every night, growing up watching these beats. It's the Kens who do all of that. The Kens who's like, the bad girl, the rival. I'm gonna take down the queen bee, and then he's jealous, and he's got the sycophant who loves him, and then they're all after the attention of the one dreamy blonde. That was the women, right? Like that was how women were depicted in so many movies and shows, and that's such a cool subversion, I think.
It is. And even I love the rivalry between Ryan Gosling's Ken and Simu Liu's Ken. They're so bitchy and catty with each other. And it is. I mean, when you were saying about Melrose Place, I was like, that's the dynamic that she's going for. But yeah, I mean, the way that the Kens, and it's very overt. The way that the Kens are treated in Barbie Land is analogous to the way that the women are treated in the real world. And Greta Gerwig is also she milks humor from that, but she's also not saying it's right. She, Ken very pointedly gets that line to Barbie where, she's come back, he's taken over and turned it into the Mojo Dojo Casa house. We just talk for a minute about when Ryan Gosling is singing the Matchbox 20 song, his very specific intonation of the word granted. Great. But anyway, he gets that very pointed line where he's like, yeah, it doesn't feel good being an accessory now, does it? And the movie is also speaking to the he is the antagonist, and you're right, at a certain point it's if you want to have dynamic storytelling, you do need a nemesis, you do need an obstacle that is overcome. And Barbie has it on two fronts, right, where she has her own psyche and her own awareness and her own but also this is a movie about gender. This is a movie about gender dynamics, and you kind of can't get away from talking about the role of men in that. Even if it's not necessarily from a heteronormative standpoint, it's women and men still inhabit, and all genders inhabit the world together. And so if you're going to talk about gender, you do have to talk about men. And the movie, I think, look, we all make jokes about Knuff and everyone wants that sweatshirt, but, Ken sort of doesn't really have anybody really animating him. He doesn't have his own inner world in the way that Barbie sort of starts to. The other Barbies do. There's Dr. Barbie, lawyer Barbie, they have their own jobs. They have their own work. His job is just beach. His job is literally just beach. And that's kind of what they all do. And it's kind of about what happens when men are not encouraged to cultivate any interiority, right? He then becomes fixated on Barbie. He becomes fixated on being in charge. He becomes fixated on horses, which was great. Sylvester Stallone, also great. And it's only when when she says to him, look, this is never going to happen between us, but also, do you even like being in charge of everything? And he's like, no. And what's so funny is it's they both kind of go off on these parallel missions where it's hers is obviously very poignant and moving, and his is kind of more comical, but he's also okay, well, who am I now if I'm freed from this? So I think the movie definitely does not absolve men, right? But I don't think it's man-hating or unfair to men. It is also about hey guys, you get to have a life beyond just being performative with each other, or having the right house, or having the right car, or having the right girl. You got to go out and find out who you are too.
And Gerwig obviously is a feminist, but she's also, I would say, a liberal in the sense of
Yeah.
things are complicated. No one is all bad. Like that's a
No.
form of liberalism. So I would think, and some of the backlash of like that I'd seen from certain gatekeepers that, well, she made a non-feminist work because she cared too much about Ken. But it's like, but and again, I can't speak to this, but I would imagine writing about race without acknowledging how race impacts white people or whatever. Not to say I'm centering it, but this
Mhm.
is a solution that involves everybody, right? Because
Yep. Yeah.
I'm not going to defeat I'm not going to suddenly make every white person go away, right?
No,
And
no.
similar of like if there's in a film, you can't make all men go away, and a sense of how, and so in a sense of coming to a, and that ending was better than, I guess, maybe someone wanted this classic Disney villain death where Barbie
Yeah.
literally tosses Ken off of, and vanquishes them, as opposed to, but the idea that you would sort of dismiss Gerwig for having Barbie empathize with Ken and
Mhm.
even realize she had made errors along the way is asking to me for more simplistic work. And that
Yes.
doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I really, it felt like one of those things of, are you really serious when I was seeing the Shapiro stuff? Because a lot of these guys, they're seeing a film as like, well, this is you. Like Ken
Mhm.
is someone who felt inferior in this world, or not
Mhm.
quite sure why he wasn't succeeding in this world. He comes into the
Mhm.
real world. He is quote unquote red pilled, to use a Matrix
Mhm.
term that the men's rights type said, co-opted, and he comes back and dominates, which is what they're saying. If you follow these, because that's what they say we should want. What has driven certain politics that arguably got Trump in office is the idea that we will go back and reclaim everything. And the, if you listen to a lot of those guys, Barbie Land is what they think the world is. They feel
Yes.
it's overtly
Yes.
feminized. Men are chumps, and only the real men need to assert their dominance. And so Gerwig is
Mhm.
showing that often people don't like seeing themselves revealed. I think that's usually what
Yes.
um kind of pisses them off. But I was so impressed by that when I was watching, because I felt like it's pretty
Yes,
deft
too.
satire of like, oh, what, like he's to the point, and she's such a great person of like these Easter eggs or allusions to classic cinema, both in movie
Yes.
musicals, which I love, but specifically when Gosling's Ken is dressed, and I would allude to, as the final look of Tyler Durden in Fight Club.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
that to
Yes.
me is totally intentional, and that was this whole film
Absolutely.
was about. We live in this feminized society, and real men need to dominate. Um,
Mhm.
and what's interesting is even in Fight Club, or American Beauty, another film where even more overtly a woman was the form of the oppressive form. Like, oh no, we've been overly in those films.
Mhm.
The man cannot escape without feeling like some need to dominate another woman. So he
Mhm.
has to have, either through sex or whatever, has to dominate another woman rather than just live a different life. And Barbie doesn't do that. She just does
No.
her own thing. She doesn't feel a need to restore the patriarchy, then pick a better kin to then date or marry or something. It is totally her own thing, which is, so cool. I'd written my own sort of spoof of what I felt guys had wanted to see the film as. I was thinking of what this film might have been like in the 90s, and I just
Oh
imagined
God.
Richard Gere as this executive who's, working with like either Demi Moore or Catherine Keener, like the executive who is a man-hating feminist who hates Barbie for all those reasons. And
Mhm.
Barbie comes to the real world and falls in love with Gear, of course, and then Gear makes a
Mhm.
passionate speech about Barbie, and
Mhm.
then somehow this melts the heart of the
The man
of the vet.
hating.
Yes, and she
She sees
finally
the
is
good
like,
in
oh
him.
yeah, and she sees the good in Barbie and everything. But like, this isn't this film. This is totally about, it's centering women. It's about the journey,
Yes.
and it doesn't need it. She doesn't need to end up with anyone at the end, which
I
is
love that.
just incredibly. that's so rare. Like usually whenever someone sees, I'm sure producers see a script, that's not an easy thing to do. They kind of look,
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever seen the film Bowfinger. It's a Steve Martin movie from 1990. It's one
I
of my
haven't.
favorites. I highly recommend it because it's what I often quote it because it's seen a pre Iron Man Robert Downey Jr. is this sort of really out there studio executive, and he gets the script. He opens it, starts okay. Then there's all this, ends good, and it's just like this idea of
Oh my
dismissing
god.
everything. And then there's all this, and kind of like that's sort of the idea of script of like in often cases of the okay, well, where's the ending? And that ending needs to be the
Mhm.
woman with the man. If she's not with the man, what's going on here? What happened?
Oh
And
yeah.
the fact that and that would have been the Gloria character. Obviously, that would have been a man who,
Oh
and
yeah.
therefore, so the fact that that's not, and it's America, Ferrara, who has this, who's amazing, and also has a great relationship, um, as a woman of color with Barbie,
Yes.
and she's seen playing with Barbie. The whole concept of Weird Barbie, which also is my understanding is something most young girls have
Yes.
done of like
Yes.
playing with the bar, sort of
You play too
defying that
hard. You
perfect,
play
well,
too
and
hard.
defying the perfection, right? Like I'm gonna draw on her, I'm gonna cut her hair, because that's part of the modeling as well, right? I'm gonna be weird and quirky, and
Mhm.
somehow everyone wants to be, right?
Well, yeah, and that Weird Barbie is like, oh yeah, I mean, Weird Barbie is played by Kate McKinnon, who is like out and proud, and she also gets like one of the great like line readings of the film. Like, so America Ferrera's like, oh, like I had a Weird Barbie too, and Kate McKinnon goes, yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't mind being made weird. And this is like to speak to your point about the ending too, is it's like, Barbie Land initially seems like this profound like utopia where everything is great. And Gerwig also goes, yeah, but even though this is a place where women are running things, there are still elements of it that are problematic. And she says, like, because like Weird Barbie is like on the outside, nobody, comes to see her unless they have a problem, or and Issa, which like I love Issa Rae, who also gets another phenomenal line reading toward the end of the movie. You know exactly what I'm gonna say when the
Yes.
cops come back and be like, our Mojo Dojo Casa houses just got dreamier, and then Issa Rae comes down the stairs and she's like, "That's because they're dream houses," and then they believe what she's saying. But she goes to like Weird Barbie and is like, we're sorry that we called you weird, and we're sorry that we like ostracized you from our community for like not being perfect, for like kind of being a reminder that not everyone's gonna kind of, and it is a very inclusive Barbie world. Like I will say, like I was very happy to see like a plus size Barbie. There's a Barbie with there's an amputee. There's a content creator who's an amputee who's in the movie and shared stuff about being behind the scenes of it. There is a transgender woman as Dr. Barbie, and she also gets a wonderful line reading where Ken's like, my job is just beach, and she's like, and what a wonderful job.
Yeah.
Like, you
Yes, I love
know,
it. She's Harry Neff is the actor,
yeah,
and
Harry
she's
Neff,
awesome.
she's great. And
Um,
but it's even still, there's room for improvement in Barbie Land, and they acknowledge that. But to your point about the ending too, they have a like the executive who's played by Will Ferrell, like at the end, he kind of comes, they mail, like if I have one kind, like they were there's this plot where she like encounters like the male executives behind Mattel, and it's this kind of meta thing, right? Where like almost like a Truman Show type of thing.
mhm,
And like Will Ferrell's a little bit too broad for me in it. And he's so kind of like fluffy in a way that there's no like real actual like menace to that character, in a way that I think there might have been maybe if we had gotten like Chris Pine and his like "Don't Worry,
mhm.
Darling" kind of era. That might
Yeah.
be my one note, but I still
No,
think
yeah.
the movie is phenomenal.
Um, that's her. I mean, I think it was always intentional to get someone like Pharaoh. But I agree with you. It was one of those things of where almost like the sobriety of Morgan Freeman doing something absurd. That's my own personal kind of
Yep.
comedic sense, but it's a sort of like that's the stuff. So I don't know if you ever seen the X-Files, where if you had the guy who played
Yes.
Skinner being ridiculous, but like still
Mhm.
having that thing, to me is often funnier because Will
Yes.
Ferrell's just absurd, right? So I like Will Ferrell, but
I do
because he's
too.
so absurd, it makes it a cartoon as opposed to the idea of like um I think Paul Newman in the Hudsucker Proxy is that example because he's Paul Newman.
Yes.
He's saying stuff that's just kind of ridiculous, and you just
Mhm.
it blows you, you know. So or Tom
Yeah.
Hanks, if you could get that casting coup, because the idea of like the ultimate nice guy who's nice or whatever,
Yeah.
and playing against that. But yeah, it's yeah, I definitely agree with you there. But it's,
Mhm.
you know, so funny. One thing I wanted to ask you about, because it's one of those, I think the issues of debate about the film, more in the sense of, so who is animating the Kens? Because the concept
Oh,
is that being played with is what's influencing you in that world. So is the implication is that the Kens are an extension of little girls playing with them, or maybe ignoring them, or is it just something we don't think about, but it's something that, you know, it's impossible not to start thinking about given how it was presented, of like, who is animating the Kens?
that's a really good question. And I think, and it's very telling the fact that I literally did not wonder that until you asked it. I was like, oh yeah. Like, but I think, you know, to one of the points that we brought up earlier, I think the fact that like, you know, Barbie has these girls who are clearly animating her through their own emotions and desires, and Kens really don't have that. They are
Mhm.
all wholly adjacent to their Barbies. I think it is this thing that happens culturally where, I mean, I am not a man, obviously, so you can tell me if I'm kind of off, but my observations of the way boys are socialized and the way men are socialized is to have passion and interest in things that are sort of not even like kind of a like socially prescribed thing, right? It's very telling. It's like the Kens all are like, well, we like karate, we like horses, we like Sylvester Stallone and his coat, we like Fight Club, we like whatever. But even then, they don't really have their own distinct personalities. You know, there's Alexandra Shipp is the writer Barbie, Harry Nafe is the Doctor Barbie. Like, there's none of that differentiation among the Kens. So I feel like sometimes like women are very much encouraged to form these deep bonds with each other and, you know, to talk about sometimes their inner worlds with each other and bond. And men sort of don't seem to have that. Men don't seem like they're really encouraged to like build relationships. I mean, literally to the point where like, you know, you're far better versed in Marvel than I am, but like literally you have a friendship between two men in like Captain America and Bucky, and the assumption is immediately, oh, well, if it's two men who are close to each other, they must be gay.
Mhm.
um and as opposed to like, you know, these are just two men who have like an emotional intimacy and care about each other, like, and so I don't think men are fully socialized to have that. And I think that like the fact that like Ken so willingly turns to all these external things to get his validation, that it's not coming from sort of like an animus of the soul in the way it is with the women, is maybe speaking to that. Like she
Oh
might
yeah,
be, yeah, because like Noah Baumbach also co-wrote this with her. So like I got, you know, yeah, yeah.
it definitely, you know, is that way. I mean, these are characters just like, and Ken's most likely being forced upon little girls. It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I guess we'll have to, I
Yeah.
don't really want to, I don't want this. I just want the dream house and do my own thing or whatever. That's my true fantasy. And all right. And I don't know where they live. I don't care. I haven't really put that much thought into them. Makes a lot of sense, and it's just sort of fascinating in that aspect of the imagination and the world, or what we think of. the queer coding is,
Mhm.
obviously the Indigo Girls is an anthem. It's pretty, again, used to be one of those things of like some studio exec either didn't know or like is it's a much better studio, but it's so often
Mhm.
in the movies, my understanding is something you get something by someone just totally didn't get. Hey, it's a
Oh, yeah.
catchy song, like
Yep.
oh,
Yeah.
and
It's a feminist song. Like, it's and it's look, like, the signifiers of queerness in that movie, I mean, like, obviously, like, the pink heel and the Birkenstock and the way the queer Barbie weird Barbie presents stereotypical Barbie with a high heel or a Birkenstock, and it's itself an allusion to the Matrix, which is itself a trans allegory. So yeah, I mean, like, is this maybe Mattel and Warner Brothers indulging in a bit of like rainbow capitalism? Maybe, but it worked on me.
yeah, or maybe this is a funny, it's sort of the ultimate sense of trenchant, even going back to Rod Serling, his saying the idea that you can in the late 50s, early 60s, he can write about race
Yes.
by using aliens, but he could never do it overtly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so this is one of maybe kind of in that sense of this is a way of to really do some of the really deep kind of queer stuff and without actually as someone fan of the book the celluloid closet and a documentary from
Mm-hmm.
back in the day, it had released when I was in college, and just
Mm-hmm.
you know I would never say it's a good thing that queer people had to be in a closet or had to live
Of
that kind of
course.
life. That's not cool. But the art that
Mm-hmm.
emerged of how you communicate things in different ways so that films read something almost on a different level creates a sort
Mm-hmm.
of inadvertent depth. So, like, sort of
Yes.
in a certain ways, heteronormative films lack that depth because they're
Yes.
just like, oh, you and me are a couple, and our tension is because we're can't be together or something, as opposed
Mhm.
to a more queer coded film of where the two women who are both teachers at something and there's tension and whatever, it's
Yeah.
all coded and it's a different layer to it than what folks can be shown. And I've always enjoyed that. I mean, it's definitely like, as you say, weird Barbie, how much of that is queer to the point where when the patriarchy comes, the fashion choice of weird Barbie suddenly shifts to, I think, as a woman has said it online, a sort of lesbian fight club Barbie. Like, she's the way she's dressed is much more coded in that way, other than
Mhm.
just being simply weird. And so sort of things are so subtle,
Yep.
but there. And it's just great. Going back to the piece you wrote, you talked a
Mhm.
lot about your experience with kind of, again, those lines of where you're kind of going after, I hate to say scraps, right? But it's like maybe Xena
Mhm.
is in love with her friend. Maybe,
Mhm.
and then maybe there's Willow is kind of
Yeah.
gay. I mean, she literally was later on, but
But what
and
happens to her girlfriend famously?
yes, and and so much of that is. Uh,
Joss
not
Whedon
to
of
go,
it.
yes, not to go into the Josh Whedonness of it, but it was sort of and also fascinating because there's a lot of bisexual eraser. So it's a lot of her
Yes.
saying, "Oh, I never had feelings for Oz or Xander," and it's like,
And it's
but
not like that.
I think you kind of did. It seems like I don't bisexuals exist, and based on the text of Buffy, Willow is bisexual, no matter what Whedon says, because I don't get the impression that she feels forced or influenced to
No.
like Waz or like Xander or anything. Arguably, I would argue there's a queerer argument for Xander, especially like how he sabotages relationships when they get too close to
Mhm.
fulfillment, when he sort of goes after sort of idealized figure. So there's the beautiful woman who's obviously in love with him, but oh,
Mhm.
I want Buffy, kind of understanding that's never going to
Mhm.
happen. So that saves him, is sort of
Mhm.
kind of coded to in certain ways more so than Willow in those years. And but now I think a
Mhm.
lot of shows, it's the Supergirl show, there was queerness right there.
Mhm.
Um, but obviously pulling it back. So I don't know if you watched how much have you watched that show, but the idea of a lot of friends that they felt like there was a relate between Supergirl and the Lena Luthor character, but that was never fulfilled, but it was right there. But then on the other point, it goes to what you were saying. Maybe it is just, maybe it can just be a really close, intimate friendship. Maybe that's the closest thing two people can have. And it doesn't have to be, it can be tricky because it's sort of like, well,
Yeah.
we don't want to bury queerness, but at the same time, any kind of close relationship doesn't necessarily mean it has to be queer. What is your thought on that? Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because when you're talking Buffy, I mean, I think to me the biggest one that was left unexplored was Faith.
Mhm.
Really, that's. But I mean, I guess to my earlier point where I was talking about some of the stuff with Marvel, it's like we are so used to getting no representation that we, like as you say, go hunting for scraps. And so, okay, here's two men who are very close to each other. They must be gay, as opposed to let us have an actual queer superhero, actual gay superhero. Let us not keep going and hunting for scraps. Like, let Captain Marvel be gay. Like, it's like it's there.
Mhm.
Let it be textual. People can handle it. I hope. But like that's what I'm talking about, I think, where it's like, and that's sort of like the subversive power of Barbie here, where it's like Barbie can be queer in any way you want Barbie to be queer. I can look at Barbie as a gay woman and go, okay, she's rejecting compet. She senses that there's something out there for her. We don't know what's going to happen in the sequel. If there is one, I kind of hope there's not. I hope that we just
Mhm.
allow this to be kind of a great movie and be done. Um, but that never happened. That's
Yeah.
why we're getting Willy Wonka, which
So
like
there's
why,
someone in
why,
there's
why?
someone in Hollywood is like, Laura, how dare you? Like
I
a
know.
studio
I'm like
executive
literally,
died.
and I don't dislike Timothy Chalamet. He is very pretty, but I'm just like, why? Why are we doing this? Nicholas Holt is right there. Anyway, but my point is, it's like, so I can look at this and go, okay, I see this part of it in my own personal journey, and my own personal journey kind of has led me to be like, I love the term sapphic. I think it's great. People who are aromantic or asexual, who get no representation, none. I mean, like, I think even, before we started recording, we're talking about Jughead and Riverdale. And Cole Sprouse even famously said, I would totally play this. I would totally play an ace character, and nothing. There's nothing. And so they look at this and go, oh, here is a blonde woman who looks like Margot Robbie, and could be with it, really pretty much be with anyone she wants to, and does not want to be with anyone, and is not in her makeup. But you can be on any level. And there's a lot of, queer responses on TikTok that are very moving. And there's people talking about that. There's people talking about Alan. That this movie sort of, by keeping itself open, can speak to a lot of people, and by keeping itself sort of broadly accessible, can speak to a lot of people. And I like that. I don't want Greta Gerwig's Barbie movie to take on all of the issues of the world. I want it to be a fun, moving blockbuster that can maybe get some like young girls who haven't had to encounter some of this stuff yet to be aware of it. Or maybe, I mean, the other kind of cohort of women who I'm seeing kind of go to this movie and have reactions to it are sort of otherwise like apolitical women who sort of don't really think that much about things beyond themselves, or think that their own issues are not that important, right? So that's what we're taught to do as women, coming out of this and going, yeah, if a movie this big can talk about some of these issues in a very basic and non-threatening way, I feel like that's a net positive. I mean, non-threatening to anyone who isn't, just Ben. But I think that's a net positive.
No, I mean both Barbie and I guess one of the closest analogs, Black Panther, were both these films
Yes.
that it wasn't just enough to be like we're filling a need and we're going to be as safe as possible. They were both very overtly political texts.
Yes.
Um, I mean, this is overtly political in the sense of where there's a literal revolution to reclaim after a coup.
Yeah.
And
In both of
you
them,
know,
actually.
and so yeah, so it is. I find that wonderful and great, and it is such a to have audiences be receptive to it, and the fact that Gerwig did it in a way that is fun, so that people they're dressed up in pink and going up, and then there's all of the getting photographed and the Barbie thing and having fun. And I feel like that's what folks really wanted in
Yes.
movies out of their lives, like having a fun time,
Yes.
popcorn and whatever. And so this is a cool popcorn film that is about something, and it sort of hopefully is
Mhm.
like a testament to for others and everything.
I
Um,
mean, it carried Oppenheimer to some degree too. I mean, the Barbenheimer memes. I mean, I did do Barbenheimer. I did go to see Barbie and Oppenheimer. And but I think that there are a lot of people who are just like, oh, this is like an event. This is like a summer event thing that we can do and be in community with each other. And I think there were a lot of people who might not have gone to see Oppenheimer. I mean, I have to be honest with you. I would have seen it anyway, just because I was curious about it. Um, but I don't know that I would have made a point. My friend and I went to see it opening weekend. I don't know that I would have made a point to see it on opening weekend. I might
mhm.
have waited down the line, but I wanted to participate in this event. But that Barbie is so big that I think I think it lifted all boats.
No, absolutely. And based on the second weekend, clearly, whatever the back, I mean, you got to be killing the just bin that there's backlash cannot impact that, and that I think it does kill these guys to think that there are things are bigger than them. What they don't
Yes.
like could be very popular, and that's maybe that they are in the minority in certain cases is devastating. Um, I always feel sorry for people like that because it's just sort of like, well, you don't have to see it. I was a film critic for many years where it's like
Yeah.
I have to see every movie. I couldn't really pick and choose, and that
Mm-hmm.
it can be, you know, uh, demoralizing after a while. But like someone like Shapiro and these guys, they choose to go out and see the stuff that's going to piss them off the most.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, why? Why are you in the professional parade raining business is not something that is in is interesting to me. From
Mm-hmm.
your piece, is there anything in your piece you would like to read to people, or anything that stands out?
Yeah,
Because it's such a really cool statement of your own experience. I would just think it would be great if folks,
thank
before we
you.
wind up, if they could hear a bit of it in your own voice.
Sure. So I'm going to scroll to a part, and this is something that I think a lot of people have really loved about the movie. And I, I'm going to try to find it. But one of the issues that Margot Robbie's Barbie has is that she is stereotypical Barbie. That is literally what she is called. And at one point, she's talking to America Ferrera, and this sort of catalyzes the amazing monologue that
Mhm.
America Ferrera gives. And she says, "But I'm not enough. I'm not all of these interesting things." And that really resonated with me, especially as someone coming out later in life, because I think there's this idea of there's a certain way to be queer or not be queer, and like that literally Barbie, Margot Robbie, this, and there even Helen Mirren's voiceover goes, well, you're gonna have Margot Robbie of all people say these lines. The fact that this figure can have questions about her place in the world and her self-esteem, and is she enough, I found that very moving. So I am going to read a few paragraphs of that, and just, yeah. So this is like kind of toward the end of like the middle of the piece, and so it's just talking about Barbie's journey, and so and now I will begin. Barbie's initiation into the real world is catalyzed by the choice presented by Weird Barbie, Kate McKinnon, out and proud in real life, the most queer-coded Barbie. She is, after all, always in the splits, a possible allusion to a certain activity many a curious girl performed with two Barbies, a pink heel and a Birkenstock, itself a tip of the beret to the Matrix trans allegory extraordinaire. Queer women offered me my own moments of revelation. At an adult coloring party, a woman stroked my arm with a lingering, meaningful tenderness. Under her touch and the honeyed brightness of her eyes, the stalks of my deadened nerves attained new life and color. Crackling with a sudden awareness of my body that delighted and excited and terrified me in a delectable way, I was so discombobulated, I missed my exit home. A sensation I'd heard my friends describe as desire. Once I knew it, I couldn't ignore it. My question is the question that will also haunt Barbie once she meets Gloria, America Ferrera, the woman who's been playing with her in a peak of nostalgia. Gloria's memories, sumptuous with the ache of longing, full of the grit and luminosity that is human emotion, most of all, love, are not about dying. Confronted with the fullness of the world, the rot and ripeness of it, Barbie's question is whether to consider living in a world that will never fully accept her. Barbie's exposure to the real world is fraught with menace, from ass grabbers to fumbling male executives who cloak their stranglehold over corporate power with a tapestry of daughters and mothers and aunts and a woman CEO once, decades earlier. In tandem with the jingoism of everyday patriarchy, Barbie also invokes the ire of Gloria's teen daughter, Sasha, played by Ariana Greenblatt, who dresses her down as a vapid fool, only good for upholding fascist beauty standards. And I'm going to skip a little bit down further. Choosing to live authentically doesn't liberate us from insecurity. In one of the movie's most poignant sequences, an overwhelmed and humiliated Barbie weeps to Gloria that even in Barbie land, she's not special. I'm not smart enough to be interesting. I can't do brain surgery. I've never flown a plane. I'm not president. No one on the Supreme Court is me. I'm not good enough for anything. Gloria's response is a searing monologue about the impossibilities of being a woman, trying to thrive in the invisible cracks threading the facade of being extraordinary all the time, while somehow we're always doing it wrong. While this speech and the pain it is meant to soothe has resonated with so many women, it holds a unique pathos for me. Scared I'm too old, too awkward, too hopelessly uncool to truly be queer. If I only discover this elemental truth about myself so late in life and practically by accident, how could I not be doing it wrong? When Barbie is given the chance to resume her life in the dream house, not exactly as it was, but a peaceable facsimile, she's still drawn more to the potential of the real world with its kaleidoscope of feelings. The chance to know all the colors of life, not just pink, even though pink is beautiful. Barbie is aware of her own imperfections. She's anticipating the pain of being in a place steeped in unfairness, in a body that will age and someday die. Still, she chooses to live, to feel. That's my excerpt.
Wow, that's so great, Laura. Really great writing, and I think of my feeling, great art inspires those feelings, which because of your own gifts you can articulate. But I feel like everyone is having that from this
Yeah.
summer blockbuster popcorn film, and that's one of the that's as a writer myself, that's the greatest thing you could ever do, is to inspire feeling like that and those thoughts. And again, from the love of Barbie that's in this, someone who loves superhero comics, the best ones are the ones that are, oh, here's where you're someone who was into this, so here's this note to this, and here's note to this, and it's all through Barbie, even to the idea of where you can hang that entire monologue that you'd mentioned on the idea that this is true. There was stereotypical Barbie,
Yeah.
she was the bomb, and they were like, okay, well, we're gonna do these things. So here's President Barbie, and here's Fighter Barbie, and then like, oh yeah, it is like, okay, well, plain Barbie at a certain point has to feel like, okay, well, what's my thing? Who am I?
Who am I?
I'm not any of those things. I'm just a stereotypical Barbie, and arguably those other Barbies existed because I wasn't enough. It was always an answer, right? To
So
your you're not, and this is obviously not to criticize the feminist backlash to Barbie, and certainly legitimate, but there was a sense of you're like Gloria's daughter, you are all these things. I'm going to unload on you in a way that she might
Mhm.
not have if it had been President Barbie or writer Barbie in the real
Yep.
world. It was like, no, you're stereotypical Barbie, you're useless. And I love the idea of like essentially making her the main character is both true to the idea that she is Barbie, but also the underdog. And
Yeah.
it's brilliant. And I think even without the lamp shading that she's still Margot Robbie, she's still someone who we can all relate to of not being good at to being sort of the one who doesn't
Yes.
have I don't have a thing. I'm just, me. Um and so that's such a it's one of those things I think it will connect for the world. Regrettably, much like the Wonka, we will not. It won't just be allowed to be its own thing. We have to
I
accept it.
know.
But
I know.
but
I mean, and I just want to say one thing too is it's like I mean Ryan Gosling is like deservedly getting his praises, and I think he is really kind of excavating some things from his like Disney Channel days here, but
Mhm.
like I think that universality that you were just talking about so poignantly, if you don't have a performer with the warmth and depth of Margot Robbie, like this does not work. Like,
She's brilliant. It's a tough role. I mean, again, it goes back. I think it's even beyond that. It's just because he's a man and he's getting the attention. I think villains always do. Again, I mentioned Heath
I
Ledger,
agree with that.
Michael B. Jordan, and Black Panther. Even though Chadwick Boseman's T'Challa is so necessary of carrying that film because we love villains, right? We love. I mean, look, I
And they're the
Tangled
flashier parts.
my beloved mother Gothel, played by Donna Murphy, and Tangled is just oh my god, I can just watch that for her. I mean, they chew the scenery, they're great, but um, everything hangs on Margot Robbie, and her performance is amazing. I think worthy. I would. It would pain me if most attention goes as great as Gosling and America Ferrera are to those two characters specifically, and that she's just Barbie because she's. I think it all hangs on her. And she's so funny. There's like moments like the "Hey Barbie" scene where she's kind of like just the little things she does with her eyes,
Mhm.
or the way she's kind of like, "You're very brave, Candace." Something the way she delivers it is
Oh
just
yeah.
she's so funny. She's so funny, consistently so. She's always I'm so glad that she's gotten what she's deserved. I mean, she's a great Harley Quinn, she's a great and everything
Oh
she's been
god.
in. But this,
Um
I think she deserves to have a film that's gonna be like in the top five of everything is well worth it. Um
She is. Yeah, and if she also has a great line delivery because the Sasha calls her a fascist at one point, and she's like, "But I don't make the trains run on time," and it's so sincere. It's just, and I don't want to steer over, but I also say if people like love Margot Robbie, people slept on this movie last year. Everyone like loved to hate it, but Babylon is really great. She's great in it, and there is a very sapphic. It's not even subtext; it is full on text in it, and so it's a yeah, Margot Robbie and another character, and it's just really beautifully done. Babylon, she's great in it, and nobody appreciated it. And I am Babylon Hive, so I must represent.
oh yes, that's I so I remember that came out and folks were worried about her career because it did well. And I'm so glad again that this is well. And I hope it does get people to look at that because she's also great in that. She is really, really talented, I think. And this film shows it.
Brilliant.
And she was steering the ship from what I read in certain ways as one of the producers. And yeah, I think along with Gerwig deserves so much credit for making sure this is such a well done piece of art, frankly. So
Yeah.
thank you for coming on
Thank
and
you.
talking about this film with me and specifically your article, which is great. Um, Laura Bogart. You can find her many places at Laura Bogart, but this Day Magazine article, Day Magazine's online publication, definitely needs your support. It's woman led, woman driven, and really please go donate, help. I think this allows these types of voices and this type of piece to get out there when it might otherwise not. Go pick up Laura's book. All of the information will be down in the show notes. Laura, author of Don't You Know I Love You. And thank you again for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Take care.
Thank you.